So this video is going to be looking in a series of slightly depressing videos about the problems in the late Republic, specifically the problems in the first part of the 60s BC. So there's going to be a section from an author called Cassius Dio, some Plutarch, and a letter from Pompey as recorded by Sallust. As is often the case with this beginning part of the late Republic, it centres around Pompey the Great. So obviously previously, what we've seen him is he'd been fighting under Sulla. He had then fought a series of rebellions, so there was two main ones, which is Lepidus and Sertorius. He then helped deal with the Spartacus revolt as well. He then successfully elected to being consul in 70 BC. So these events come afterwards, and they are essentially two major problems going on in the late Republic in the early part of the 60s. So we're talking around 67 BC and 66 BC. And one of them is pirates, as you can see from the subtitle. And then there's also our old friend Mithridates, who we had sort of talked about when we talked about Sulla and the reasons for the civil war. So the pirate problem is mentioned in these two sectional sources, but I'm actually weirdly going to start with this little bit of Plutarch, and then I'll come back up to the Cassius Dio, because it actually explains what the problem is. Well, Cassius Dio does not. So Plutarch tells us that the power of the pirate extended over the whole of the Roman Mediterranean Sea, and as because of this, all navigation and all commerce was at a standstill. So trade basically completely stopped because of pirate actions. As a result of it, there is a shortage of provisions and there's a breakdown of supplies. So this is a huge problem for the Roman people, in all honesty. So their main areas of getting grain were places like Sicily and Cyprus and Egypt. And obviously if you have pirates who, like modern day pirates in around the coast of Africa, if they control the sea, trade can't continue. And there are stories in some other sources about them kind of capturing Roman dignitaries and kind of like torturing them and throwing them overboard and just like laughing at them. So the Romans had lost control, and there's a real problem with food supply. Now, one of the key things we have to look at for the late Republic is some of the causes of the fall of the late Republic, and one of them is kind of economic and social problems. So this is an example of an economic issue in terms of trade had stopped and supply of food had stopped. So every time you see anything to do with like grain supply or trade, anything like that, highlight that automatically and label it as an economic problem, because people always find that the hardest section to write in an essay if it's relevant. So I say this every year and I'll say it again, highlight them and sort of star it, do whatever you need to do to show an economic issue. Anyway, so there is this economic issue. So Pompey, so there's a discussion basically in the Senate about maybe sending Pompey out of the commission to drive the pirates off the seas. Okay, because Pompey's very successful. He'd beaten Lepidus, beaten Sertorius, he'd claimed the glory for Spartacus. He was a fantastic general. So who are you going to send? You're going to send Pompey. So Gabinius is one of Pompey's friends, and he draws up a law. Gabinius, just so you're aware, was a tribune. So again, we've got this importance of friendship and alliances in terms of getting people power. So according to the law, Pompey was given the supreme naval command, so given like the whole Roman navy. And this would amount to, in a different colour because it's a quote I'm sure going to see a million times, to an absolute authority and uncontrolled power over everyone. So this law was just, it can't be underestimated how much power it gave to Pompey. So it covers the whole sea, as mentioned here, and the entire mainland to a distance of 50 miles from the sea. So he has the whole of the Mediterranean and 50 miles inland. So that is just, it crosses boundaries, it crosses borders with provinces. It is huge. And the law, the provision, was going to be put in place for 3 years, weirdly. 3, don't know why 3. And then it would then run out. So because this is what's called an extraordinary command, it has to be passed into law to do it, because it overrides everything else. So because it's a law, it's read to the People's Assembly, and the people really like it because it's Pompey and everybody likes Pompey. The Senate, however, were worried. They were very, very concerned about it. So everyone except Caesar, as in Julius Caesar, opposed the law. Now, according to Plutarch, the reason why Caesar supports the law is because he's trying to, I love this sentence, he was trying to steal into the people's hearts and make use of them for his own interests. You should be aware that Plutarch does not like Caesar at all. And according to Plutarch, everything Caesar was doing was in order to become king later, which is not true. It's just not true. But it does show a problem with some of the sources in terms of their kind of prejudices against certain people, and Plutarch is against Caesar. Plutarch quite likes Pompey. He's a little disappointed in him, but he quite likes him. He doesn't like Caesar, so that's why he's kind of, Caesar supports the law because he's trying to make himself popular. I mean, that might well be true. Who knows? But what ends up happening is the law is passed. The people actually kind of try and attack the consuls and the Senate, and the uproar causes kind of the law to pass. So if we kind of go back up to the Cassius Dio, it picks up the same thing. So all except the Senate turned to Pompey, so it reflects what Plutarch said. And this is because they're really worried about putting this massive command into Pompey's hands. And it's understandable because he has control of the navy and a massive army. If he wanted to, he could, turn on the state and take over completely. Look at what, this is was less than 13, 14 years after what happened with Sulla. So there's a genuine concern, and I think an understandable concern, that giving this much power to Pompey could be very dangerous, because it could have been very dangerous. So the people learn that the senators are unhappy, so another quote you probably use quite a lot. So they raise an uproar, even go as far to rush upon them. So basically they attack the senators, and if the senators had not got out of the way, they would have certainly killed them. So we've got mob violence being used. You've got the power of the people. So Pompey's given the command because the people want him to have the command, not because the Senate wants the command. This is going to be very interesting for Pompey in terms of where he draws his power from. At this point in his career, it's a mixture of some senators, but very much the people. But the people love him because he's a great general. The Senate will eventually come round to support Pompey a little bit later, more openly. So Pompey was eager for the command, I bet he was, because of his ambition. He wants dignitas, and because the people really wanted him to. He saw there was opposition within the Optimates. Pompey is essentially an Optimate, so he decides to kind of pretend that he has been forced to take the command. He doesn't really want it, and that kind of helps waylay some of the concerns that some senators have, and then eventually he gets given the command over the pirates. Fine. So he goes off and deals with the pirates and is very successful. So he has the command for 3 years, and he manages to basically get rid of them in 3 months, which is great. I mean, congratulations to Pompey. He is a brilliant commander. A year into his command, the issue with Mithridates is continuing. So this is the same Mithridates who Sulla had gone to try and fight against as well. Now, I can't remember why he comes back into power, but he does. And the Romans basically sent other commanders to deal with them. And one of the commanders, this guy here called Lucullus. And Lucullus was seen to be taking far too long to deal with the situation. Now, there is some evidence that Lucullus was deliberately delaying some aspects in order to enrich himself from the provinces, which is what all Romans kind of did. So there is a genuine sort of a criticism that could be raised against Lucullus. But anyway, the Senate decides he's taking too long and they want it dealt with. Okay, so Pompey was not busy because he's dealt with the pirates and he was out in the east anyway. So Manilius, who's another tribune, proposes a law which Pompey should be given all the territory and forces then under the command of Lucullus, combined with a couple of other areas, and he should be entrusted with the task of making law on the king Mithridates and another king called Tigranes. With this commission, he was retained his naval forces and the authority over the seas he had already. In practice, this meant putting the whole of the Roman Empire into one man's hands. So that's a really good quote about sole power, about the power of individuals, etc. So if we kind of unpack this a little bit, so because the law for the navy when he was dealing with the pirates was for 3 years, they haven't repealed that law. That's why he still has the naval forces. And then if he's given the command of the Mithridatic war, that obviously puts the army further into his control. Because remember, sorry, I get myself tied in knots, that the pirate law had 15 miles inland as well, so had some army with it. This gives him the rest of sort of another section of the Roman army. So this is literally putting everything kind of into his hands. A little bit of hyperbole going on there. It's not quite as far as Plutarch is pointing, but it did put a huge amount of power into his hands. So again, there's a huge potential here for this to be a massive issue. So these two commands overlap with each other. So you have the pirate law, I'll type it up here, which is called the Lex Gabinia, because it's named after the person who proposes it. And then this law is passed, which is the Lex Manilia, because it's proposed by Manilius. So these two laws overlap with each other. Now, during his campaigns, Pompey does run into a few problems, as he would expect. And as a result of this, he sends a letter to the Senate, basically kind of telling the Senate off for not helping him enough, and he wants some help. And there's kind of like a bit of a veiled threat through the video as well, through the source as well. So he says, "I had undertaken so many toils and dangers on those occasions from my early adolescence," so that's obviously fighting Sulla, "when under my leadership the most criminal enemies were routed and salvation was obtained for you." So that could be Lepidus, Sertorius, and Spartacus, as well as the pirates. "Your decisions against me in my absence," blah, 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 blah. "I was flung into the most savage of wars despite my age." So he's admitting he was far too young to have these commands. Okay. "You have done my best to destroy me by hunger." So basically, Pompey was running out of money, and he had asked the Senate for more money and sort of grain supplies to feed his army in order to deal with the Mithridatic War properly. But because we know, based on sources we've already read, that the Senate was somewhat concerned about the power of Pompey, they had been very slow to give him the funds that he needed. In fact, they had refused to give him certain funds. So he's a little bit exasperated by this situation, which is why he's writing to the Senate. So he kind of puts a few rhetorical questions. Was this the expectation that Roman people sent its children to war? Probably not. Are these prizes for wounds and for blood spills on so often on account of the Commonwealth? Okay. So he's going to go, you sent me to war. This is how you treat your soldiers. You starve them to death. This isn't fair. This isn't right. This is what you're telling the mothers, that their children have been sent to war to starve. He says, "I've used up all my private resources and hopes, while in the meantime you have scarcely given a single year's expenditure over 3 years." So he's really chastising them of going, what do you think I can do without any food and money? Which is a fair point, to be fair to Pompey. So he says, "I received from you only a nominal command," which is the one from Lucullus. "Within 40 days I assembled an army and removed from the Alps into Spain an enemy already working at the neck of Italy." So that is that reference there, is about Spartacus. Yeah, it's about Spartacus. "I captured Gaul, the Pyrenees, Lastania, and the Indicates. I withstood the first attack of victorious Sertorius. And for all of this I've done, you respond with destitution and hunger." So he's going to say, I've been really successful, I've done really hard work, I've been really victorious for the Roman people, and this is what you do. You basically starve my men. So as a result, the condition of my army is the same as the enemy. So the enemy is struggling and I'm struggling. No one's got any pay, which is obviously a problem. And it is this to which I warn and beseech you to pay attention, and not to compel me by needs to look after my own private interests. So this is kind of this warning. In fact, we'll do it in a different colour because I can. So he's sort of saying, and he makes the same warning down here. So I'm raising this awareness because you're forcing me to do things I don't want to do. And it says, "My reluctant prediction is the army, and with it the whole war in Spain, will transfer to Italy." So he's sort of saying, we'll come back, and then you'll have to deal with a really angry, unhappy, starving army, and the war will expand back into Italy. And what are you going to do about it? So there's sort of this kind of vague threat of, I will come back with my commands, and then what are you going to do? So as a result of this letter being read out in the Senate, both because of the critical condition and fearing of the return of the army, I bet they were worried about the return of the army under Pompey, they then used every means to arrange for pay and reinforcements. So one of our key themes for questions is about the methods in which politicians use for success. So we have an example here of Pompey not using violence, but certainly using the threat of violence to get what he wanted, which in this case was specifically paying food for the army so he could be very successful out in the east. So it's a good example of that. So that is kind of an explanation of the two major issues that were going on in the first part of the 60s BC.